Welcome to Science and Wisdom Live, where scientists and meditators meet.
Sister Jayanti, apart from having this extraordinary interest and work to do with the climate change, is also a long-term meditator and a yogi. And we're going to discuss, hopefully, the two sides of this amazing work and how they came together. But first of all, I'd like to put people into the picture of who the Brahma Kumaris are. And because Sister Jayanti actually knew the founder of the Brahma Kumaris, it's a very contemporary, we can't call it a religion because they do not want to be known as a religion. They want to be known more as a spiritual movement, a universal spiritual movement. So they don't want to align themselves with any particular religion. But nonetheless, the Brahma Kumaris did start off in India, and it's very contemporary. The founder, Brahma Baba, passed away quite recently in 1969. So all that has happened since then is really quite remarkable. I mean, it's a huge, huge organization. It's a huge, huge movement. There are thousands, literally thousands of centers all over the world. It's in 120 countries. In India alone, there are 4,000 centers. And in Britain, there are 44, I think I've got that right, 44. And thousands of people go every week to the London Centre, which is where I visited last week, which is an incredibly impressive building. It's huge. It has many, many rooms for meditations and for teachings. They teach in Hindi, English, and Tamil. And they have a huge dining room, and they have an auditorium which seats 500 people. And thousands of people go there every week from London. So they're obviously doing something very right, because, to attract that kind of, in such a short time, to attract that number of people. And furthermore, which is even more, well, no, not more, but as impressive, is that it's all free. They don't charge for anything. These big buildings that they've got, and these beautiful buildings they've got, they're all financed by donation. So the heart is obviously going in the right direction with the Brahma Kumaris. So first of all, I'd like to ask Sister Jayanti, whose parents knew and she knew the actual founder, to tell us, why was he so special? Why was he so special? What did he have that triggered this vast worldwide movement?
I'd like to begin with the expression Om Shanti. Om means I am, and Shanti means peace. So it's a hello to my sisters and brothers. We use the word Om Shanti to say hello, to say goodbye. How are you at all times? So just to say Om Shanti to you all.
Thank you.
And yes, the founder was an amazing person who surrendered his life to God. And perhaps the most amazing thing about him is the fact that love for God shone through his forehead, through his eyes, through his words, through his actions, and was able to give you the feeling of the presence of God. And so young or old didn't matter, color, race, religion didn't matter. You just felt that you're in the presence of that being from above. His presence triggered that feeling of being in the presence of the one above, but also allowed you to come to the awareness of the inner being. So he wasn't so interested in your physical position, your possessions, your property, your identity in the world out there. His eyes would be drawn to the soul within, and it would give you the power to also move away from the limitations of the physical form and come to the awareness of the inner being. So this was a very special quality that he had. It didn't happen by chance. His own practice for many years had been to stay in that consciousness of the inner world, that inner being. Very practical and very efficient in all the external work that he did. But the focus was to stay in that inner awareness and to be connected with the divine and to inspire others to have that same experience.
I notice, Sister Jayanti, that you keep pointing to your forehead. Why are you doing that? When you speak about the divine.
Okay. Our understanding and experience is that the location of the being that I am, Atma, the soul, is actually here, not on the skin, but just in front of the pineal gland. And if you think about the images that we have in the East, where they show the third eye, it's here. Where they show the eye of wisdom, that's here. And so the seat of the soul in the physical form is actually here in the center of the forehead. And yes, we believe that there's a being who is the source of all positive attributes. And so yoga, union, connection is of the soul with the one above.
Thank you. Thank you. So your teacher, your guru, he realized his divinity through meditation or through prayer, or through which means?
Through the whole of his life, he had been a very religious person, following the Gita, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and he would be meditating and discussing concepts of spirituality with close friends and so on. So that was the preparation through his lifetime. But when he was just approaching 60, the time that in India you would normally retire at that point, what happened was that he had a series of visions. The vision of a being of light, a little bit like the image behind me, that being who is the source. Another vision was he had a vision of what we call Vishnu, the four-armed figure. And that's a representation of man and woman and their togetherness, but also the combined energy of masculine and feminine. And he heard the words, Tattvam Asmi, you are this, you are he. And he didn't understand. He needed time away to be able to understand it all. And the third vision that he had, it didn't happen all at once, but it happened over a period of time. And the third vision that he had was of a beautiful world in which there was love, beauty, justice, truth, all the things we would want to have. And he saw that the present modern world, because this was in 1936 that he was having these visions, he saw the collapse of that world. But out of that collapse then emerged this beautiful world. And that was the start of his own journey in Raj Yoga.
So if I understand you correctly, Brahma Baba had a vision of getting away from materialism into a much kinder, better world. But was there also going to be a feeling of, because it's a very materialistic world at the moment, and we are in a state of climate change and crisis. And many people think, and maybe Brahma Baba did too, that, the world was going to go through a lot of really big upheavals. And is that what prompted your mission on climate change?
Of course, that has to be a part of it. But also what happened was something very practical. We've been affiliated to the United Nations since 1982. and then were given the affiliation with ECOSOC, the Economic Social Council. And at that time, there were thousands of NGOs, but only maybe about 400 or so affiliated to ECOSOC. And we were getting information about all the things that were going on. And in the 80s, we had information about the Earth Summit, and the preparation for the Earth Summit was happening. And so the Earth Charter was being created. So we got involved with that because that was very much connected with values. And then the Rio Summit happened. So the Brahma Kumaris were there. And then we started to see that there were these events happening on climate change. And we felt that it was very important to bring in an element that hadn't yet been discussed within the climate change conferences. And so when the next climate change conference happened in Copenhagen, where we have a center, we thought that, well, it's right here in our patch and it's something that we're interested in. And so we joined. And it was an opportunity to bring in the subject of consciousness, because they had never looked at consciousness in terms of climate. And we had a few raised eyebrows when they saw our stand in the exhibits there explaining this idea. But once you started to talk about it and people understood that it's our consciousness that leads to everything else, that leads to actions, and it's human activity that has become so materialistic and so much involved with consumerism that's created the problem that we have at the moment. And so that was the start of our journey with climate change.
Right. So I think you said at one point also that it's the erosion of spiritual values, which was also contributing to this climate crisis that we're in at the moment. Could you expand on that a little bit? What you see is the erosion of the spiritual values, and how can we just stop that?
When I just am tuned to my physical identity and I've lost touch with my spiritual identity, then I don't have an anchor on which to be able to connect with my own inner core values. A premise that we begin with is that every soul has goodness. And so that goodness is expressed through its peace, love, purity, truth, and joy. And so these are the fundamental qualities of the human spirit. But everybody seems to be looking for these outside, and nobody seems to remember that they're actually inside within us. And so physical awareness and being locked into that physical condition with a denial of the spiritual condition or the spiritual existence means that I don't access these qualities. And then I'm chasing after love, I'm chasing after happiness, going on holiday, buying things, trying to satisfy my needs on that level. But of course, it doesn't work. And it's only when I come back to the awareness of my spiritual identity that I then realize that all that I was looking for outside is actually within. And turning inwards, then I'm connecting with the love, the joy, the beauty, the truth that lies within. And that lies within every single human soul. Absolutely. And I then understand that I don't need to be chasing after things out there anymore. And so it's very easy to simplify my lifestyle and come back to whatever are my basic needs. And whatever else I need is actually something that I can share with others. I don't need to accumulate. I don't need to hold, but I just need to be able to share and see others as my family. And so this concept of the world as a family where we're all in it together. And even though it's part of the world that has contributed the greatest amount to the carbon emissions and so to climate change, somehow, very sadly, the effect of that is hitting the poorer countries the hardest, like in Africa, for instance. It's really very, very sad that it has to happen like this. The huge storms that have happened, the typhoons that have happened in Africa recently, that have hit the coast of Madagascar and Mozambique and Southern Africa, they did very little to contribute to climate change. And the rest of the world that actually made climate change happen isn't taking responsibility. So it's actually the fact that we're in the same boat. It's one human family, it's one planet that we share. And it's only when we come to a spiritual consciousness that we'll then want to support each other and share with each other, because it's not that one part of the planet is going to escape climate change. It's already multiplying. I spoke about the storms in Africa, but equally, there are multi-thousands right now here in Britain who have been hit by the storms in the north and Scotland especially. And so I've just seen the photographs there, and okay, so it's not vast numbers. It's in terms of numbers, it's a few that have died, but it's multi-thousands of homes that are without electricity, and it's cold outside and it's cold up there. And so we're beginning to see climate change affect everyone to a certain degree or another. But of course, the poorer countries are being devastated in many different ways. So to come back to spiritual awareness and to be able to support each other is important. To come back to my spiritual identity and know that I don't need to buy till I drop. It's not necessary to do that. I can be content and have a life in which there's great happiness and joy with basic needs, nothing more than that.
Sister, it sounds, your vision and your message is beautiful, and I think it resonates with a lot of what many, especially the young people, are feeling these days. But I wonder how we can get through to the politicians and the big business people. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I wonder, do you see all the work you've been doing for so many years now in this arena? Do you see any changes at the top levels, like with the politicians, with the business people? Can you see any improvement or any shift in values?
Definitely.
Oh.
There is definitely some change. I'll give you two examples. A few years ago, there were many countries or many individuals in countries denying that climate change had anything to do with human intervention. Their narrative was that, well, the world goes through its cycles and there's always been climate change, and it takes maybe 800 years, 1,000 years for climate to move from this pattern to that pattern. So at the moment, this is what's going on. And I personally was challenged by a climate change denier at a conference, a COP conference at some point. But I don't see that happening anymore. I think that there might be a few odd individuals here and there. Unfortunately, some were in power until fairly recently, but it's a handful of climate deniers now. For the vast majority, science has actually shown very, very clearly that the heating of the planet is a human phenomenon. It's not a natural one. It's human intervention. So that's a big change.
Yes.
Lost many years in which there could have been transformation because of those climate deniers, but fortunately now that's in the past. And then this year, we almost got to an agreement in which the countries were ready to say that fossil fuels should be phased out by 30 years.
Yes.
And unfortunately, two very big, powerful countries who are big emitters of carbon, they intervened at the very last minute and said, no, we can't take this on board yet. You have to give us more time. You have to give us till 2070. Now, that postponement, of course, had to happen because the thing about the agreements at the UN, especially within climate change, is that it has to be a consensus. So you can't say, well, the majority are here and it's only a minority there. But their voice was powerful enough to carry it, and the elimination of fossil fuel use was postponed. So what's going to happen between now and then, who knows? But to me, it was a very hopeful sign that there was the recognition of fossil fuel damage, which hadn't been there until 2021. So I feel that these two facts are huge. The third thing, actually, I want to also add is that there's now more and more understanding of the methane output from animal husbandry, dairy farming, and the meat production. And so this again is making some people say, okay, we can't tell you all to become vegetarian or vegan or have plant-based diet, but we can suggest, can you reduce your intake of these products? And that is beginning to catch on. It's slow, but it's happening. I mean, 2015, there was only one person who was talking about and was willing to give a platform to people who had done the research on this subject. And that was a man called Rockstrom, and he now heads up the Institute of Advanced Sustainable Studies in Potsdam. But that he was unusual. He was very much climate and science, but he actually promoted the idea of plant-based diet. But now I think a large number are beginning to acknowledge this and recognize this. Now, whether there can be change quick enough now to avert what they call the tipping points, that point beyond which things are irreversible. Now we have to see what destiny has in store. But certainly these three factors are now generally accepted by people.
Right. Well, sister, you became a nun. Oh, no, you're not a nun. You're a sort of nun, you told me, when you were very young, when you were 19. And this required you personally to really simplify your own lifestyle. And I believe you took vows, although you're not a nun. You're a surrendered sister, I believe you're called, which is a beautiful title. And you took promises of celibacy and I've forgotten the other thing, but I know it was simplicity as well.
Yeah.
Celibacy and something else, I've forgotten. But which brings me to, in a rather strange way, to the other problem of the world at the moment, of the crisis, which is overpopulation. I was interested that in your organization, people can get married, but they still have to vow to celibacy. Does it work?
Usually it happens the other way, that if people are single, then their choice is to remain single rather than get married and be celibate. But where we have people who are already married, then of course we would encourage them to stay with their family and to continue with responsibilities of work and children and so forth. And then of course it has to be a discussion between the couple as to when they want to start practicing this. We don't say, do it now, and you can't come if you don't. No, the doors are open and they can come when they want. And we explain to them the benefits And they then decide when it is they want to start observing. And very often, some of them would say, well, we're going to experiment with it for a month or 3 months or 6 months and see how it goes. And of course, that is also their choice. It has to be a mutual decision together.
Yes, I liked what you told me when I came to visit you, that people are attracted to your movement because it's of its gentle discipline. And you start off, if people want to come, there's levels of courses that they go through. Like the first one is like the meditation, and then there's the philosophy, and then there's the teachings. Yeah. And they just see how they go. But then once they decide that they want to really commit to the Brahma Kumaris, then it's really quite strict. I mean, it's a dedication. I think they have to turn up every day, I think at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is a very interesting but gradual way. So
look at it from the other perspective. What is it they're gaining that makes them get up early and start walking or cycling or driving to the center to be there early in the morning? There must be something that they're experiencing that's motivating them to make this happen. Because again, we don't say you have to come every day. Right. It's absolutely up to you. And during lockdown, people couldn't come every day. And so they were watching on Zoom, they were watching online on webcasts in different ways. And then as soon as the doors opened, so many people, not just in the Brahma Kumaris, but in the churches and other religious organizations, they would say, well, we're not sure that people are going to get out of their armchairs and come early, especially during winter. And yet here we found that they came back with such love. They wanted to be in that atmosphere. They wanted to be with the rest of the community and feel that friendship and warmth and support. And of course, then they felt that the meditation they were having in a place that had a ready-made atmosphere was very supportive. And also that when they were studying the teachings together in community, I know that within Buddhism, the Sangha has a very important place. So the community, again, here, the study when you're together is different to the study when I'm watching on the screen or I'm sitting at home just reading myself. So there's something that they gain. And this is why they want to come.
Yes, it has a very, very peaceful and beautiful atmosphere, your center. It's really beautiful. And what I really was interested in is that on the hour, every hour, there is music that comes through, and then everybody stops whatever they're doing, and they just are silent for 1 minute. And I believe this is all over the world, this happens. It's not just here in London. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the importance of stopping, whether you're in a meeting or cooking or what, just for a minute, and to go inwards. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of silence? I think you called it your traffic control measure. The traffic, of course, was all the thoughts going on and on and on, round and round in our heads all the time. So can you, and is this part of us finding our divinity, which is within, is the silence? Actually, I many years ago when I was looking, I went to an ashram in India. It was Sai Baba, actually. And the thing which I took away with me most of all was the sign on the gatepost, beautiful sign, which said that it is only in the depth of silence that the voice of God can be heard. And so I thought, anyway, I wondered if you could speak a little about the importance of silence and just stopping. Maybe every hour, just for a minute.
So many people were finding that early morning, they were giving their time to silence, meditation, to study. And then again in the evening, they would have a time set aside for meditation before retiring at night. But they found that they weren't able to keep that higher level of consciousness through the day. And then the suggestion came to us through our teachings that try stopping at regular times through the day. And so the start of that was, I can date it, it was in 1977. And we started with a system of stopping 5 times a day. And that was very, very beneficial. And then further, we realized that in the space of the 2.5 hours or the 2 hours that have passed in between, again, we needed help. And so this became a symbol of just the external help that you can create for yourself if you're on a path which is leading you in that direction of silence and divinity. And so now it's become every hour on the hour, which is very helpful. And what we're doing in that time is turning the direction of our thoughts from whatever we're engaged in outside to the world inside, and coming back to the awareness of this inner being, the soul, Atma. And in that awareness, then feeling the presence of the divine, connecting with the divine. And so, yes, I loved the slogan that you shared from the Sai Baba ashram, because it is a reality that while there's the noise inside, not just the noise here, but the noise inside, the monkey that's chattering away all the time, I can't hear anything else. I'm just listening to that sound. And when I learned to allow my thoughts to slow down, and you can do that when you take your mind on a spiritual track, thinking about the soul and the original qualities of the self, the mind slows down. It's alert. It's not sleeping. It's alert, but the speed has slowed down, and you're beginning to experience some of the spiritual truths of peace, of love, etc. And so in silence, I can first realize the beauty of the inner being. In silence, I can start my connection with the divine and experience God's love and all that the source wants to give to me. And further on the journey, it is in silence that I'm able to explore what's going on deeply within myself, so that I can see where my reactions are based not on that truth and love, for my reactions are based maybe on competition, maybe on jealousy, maybe there's anger still there, maybe there's laziness there. So the first is the discovery of beauty. And that's very important, because that gives you the confidence to keep moving. But then there is the discovery of whatever it is that's not clean and needs to be cleansed. And when I start doing that, of course, there's a transformation that's visible, and I'm able to move ahead on that journey. And it takes a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while.
Yes. Yes, I think a lot of people are frightened of silence. We surround ourselves with noise, and people even have got headphones on when they're listening to music when they're going down the street. And some people have to have noise, some noise going the whole time.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite a good idea to just do like a minute, just a minute at a time, maybe. Yeah. Because once you get used to silence, you don't really want to go back to any noise. That there is such a peace in silence, and it can become very companionable, I think, which is quite useful in the lockdowns. If you're used to silence and you're used to that, it's you don't feel lonely.
It's true.
Yes,
absolutely true. What happens is, if I haven't understood spiritual truths, basic understanding of the spiritual dimension, then in silence, what tends to happen is that I'm aware of my anxiety, my worries, the things that are bothering me, and I feel more and more stressed. I think about the bad things that have happened to me. And so that wave of sorrow again comes up and hits me. And so it's not useful. And sometimes you've associated silence with punishment. You know, a child being sent into Coventry, that sort of idea that you isolate a child and the child has to struggle. And so that memory that silence is punishment is still very much around. But when I understand that I am the master of my own thoughts, and I can select which thoughts to create, and I learn how to do this, then yes, the silence is, as you said, something that one enjoys. It's one that pulls you. You're drawn to it again and again. And especially if you've been in a space that is very profound and you've had those very powerful experiences, you want to have more and more time in silence.
Yes. Yes. I think people suffer a lot these days in the world from loneliness. You live in a community, a large community. Would you ever like to live alone? Could you live alone, do you think?
I've never been tested. And so maybe I wouldn't manage, but I do like my own company, and I'm not being egoistic, but I don't have a problem being in the house on my own for hours at a time. And that's fine. It's not a problem for me. And very often when I used to travel pre-COVID times, I used to prefer to travel on my own so that I would have that space. And many other people I know want to take a companion with them. I'm going here, I'm going there. Somebody else should come with me. But for me, I enjoy the silence. I enjoy being on my own.
Yes.
But whether I'd manage it if it was for an extended time, I'm sure I'll be tested one day.
So Sister Jayanti, you've been a nun, a sort of nun, a surrendered sister for over 50 years now. It's a really redundant question. I mean, your face and your whole demeanor proves that you are very happy with the choice that you made age 19, which is very young, really, I think. But is there anything that was challenging for you? Did you ever wish to have children, for example? Or has it just been one straight line for you?
It hasn't been a straight line, that's for sure. I discovered bits of my personality, sanskaras. I think some of you are familiar with that term, the imprints that we carry within the soul. So I didn't realize that I could ever have anger, because until I came to live in a community, everything was fine. It was comfortable. It was okay. So there was a bit of adjustment needed with family and so on, but nothing that ever caused anger. And so then by the time I was 23 and I was needing to work with others, I realized what is anger. And it became quite ugly. And a moment came when I decided, I have to finish this. I have to deal with this. And so having gone down to the valley, I then started to climb up again. And it's not just one valley. There's several valleys that you go to.
Right.
Sometimes you discover the attachments that you have, and you have to deal with those.
Yes.
But I'd like to share a story about why it was not a difficult thing for me to think about this life. When I went back to India for the first time after having migrated to London with my parents, it was a gap of about 6 years. So I was about 8 when I left India, and I was 14 when I went back. And they're very formative years and very impressionable years. And so I'd forgotten that there was poverty, and actually the town in which I was born and grew up in didn't have that sort of stark poverty that Mumbai does. even today, there's a difference between Pune, where at the city it's now a big city, but still it doesn't have that stark poverty as Mumbai. And we arrived in the monsoon time because that's when you have school holidays here. And as we were going from the airport into the city, it was pelting down monsoon, heavy monsoon rain. And along the sides, the pavements, I could see that there were people who had little cardboard shanty huts, and the rain had melted the cardboard. It was that strong. And they had nowhere to go. They were just there on the pavement. And my heart's desire at that moment was to turn back to the airport and leave. But of course, I'm coming back to meet my family after years away, so I couldn't do that. But it was difficult to get used to that.
Yes.
And I think that sowed the seed of two things in my mind. One was that my life had to be a life of service. It couldn't just be for my own comfort and pleasure. And secondly, it made me aware that the world already has too many people and too much injustice, and something needs to happen. And I couldn't have the thought of bringing a child into a world like this. That was something that came into me very strongly from that particular experience. It impacted my brother also. He was younger than me. He was 11 at the time, but he was also very deeply impacted. And his thought was, again, that my life has to be one of service and something to do with justice. And we've taken very different paths, but I have to say that his life also has been one of service to others. So it wasn't a difficult thing for me to say, no, I don't want to have a child. It was a thought that came into me, and I saw that particular scene of suffering. And when there was, when you're young, you sit around and you have discussions about what you're going to do when you grow older. And the girls I was with all were saying that they wanted to go to university, then they wanted to get married. And I said, yes, I'll go to university, but I want to have a career in which I can do some service. I don't want to just get married and have children, etc., etc. It has to be a life of service. And so that idea was very deep in my heart. So there was no struggle with that.
Yes. Thank you. One last question, if I may. I'm intrigued, I think we all are, how Brahma Baba, back when he was alive, thought it best to put his vision and his sort of movement in the hands of women. Why do you think he thought that? Because it's continued today, and I believe your predecessor. I mean, there are walls of wonderful pictures of these amazing women in your center. It's just extraordinary. And they're all the kind of leaders who have been there. And then I think that your predecessor worked till she was 104, which is impressive. So and you look as though you're going the same way, Sister Jayanti, don't mind my saying so. And I just wondered why he thought that would be, why he had that vision. Do you know what that's about? About feminine, is it feminine soft power or something? I don't
Okay, what happened was that he was in that area of India. It was a combined India. Pakistan didn't exist. This is the 1930s. And so the town in which he was born and grew up was Hyderabad, in that province of Sindh. And that's still around today. But now it's, as I say, the country's been divided. And what he saw was that women had absolutely no rights at all. It isn't just that they were second-class citizens, it is that they weren't really given a proper education. It was thought unnecessary for women to have that. So girls maybe had just 2-3 years of schooling and then were married off. And so they were always under the instructions of their father or their husband or even an elder brother. And they never had their own opinion or choice on any level. And he observed this situation and felt it was very unjust. And then when he had this vision of a better world, a world of truth and justice, what came to him was that the first injustice that was happening right there where he lived was that of gender imbalance. And so he decided that not only would he have young women, girls and mothers take training as teachers and leaders, but it is something that was quite extraordinary and would be so even today. He had been a very successful diamond merchant, a jeweler with amazing creative gifts. So his jewelry was recognized as being very precious, very beautiful. And he, after these visions, he went off to be alone in the Himalayas. And after a few months, he came back again. And what he did was to tell his business partner, you divide up whatever is my right, you give to me and you keep the rest. There was no debate, no discussion, no lawyers involved, just a gentleman's agreement and that trust in each other. And this is what happened. And whatever came to him as his rightful share, he trusted that it was. He created a trust of 12 young women, and he surrendered all his assets to this trust so that then this trust could then run the affairs of the organization, because by then many had gathered to hear him, to be in his presence. And what he did in the early days was just simply chant Om, and lots of people came, and many young women and married women also came. But it was a community in which many of the menfolk would be away for business. And so that's how it became a majority of women. But he surrendered his property to these young women who did not have a bank account. All they had was love and faith and trust. And he trusted that they would be able to make the right decisions. Now, that must have been an incredible experience for everybody, for the women, but also for him to have that total trust that this vision that he had had and this inspiration he was getting was the right one. And so this is how it started. And of course, today, it's not only women who run the organization, but we have our brothers who have amazing qualities. And so they're also very much part of the movement in the university. So it's a real partnership now. But they would also prefer to have women in the foreground making the final decisions.
It's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Sister Jayanti. That's been a very rich and profound talk you've given us. I think that we might have some questions. Is that right now?
First of all, let me say thank you and Om Shanti to Sister Jayanti and Vicki for this inspiring, nourishing conversation. I'll maybe start this Q&A session by asking Sister Jayanti, you mentioned the need for this movement away from the physical and going towards the spiritual. But for many people in the modern world, it's very hard to think of a soul or a creator of God. And very often there is this strong identification with the physical. And this also makes it very hard to accept impermanence and the fact that the body gets old, it can get sick, and also to accept impermanence in the world and, for example, the loss of ecosystems through climate change. Can you say something about how can people who don't have this strong trust in the spiritual dimension can cope better with loss and impermanence and the frailty of the physical level?
It's difficult. It really is. And whether people believe in God or not is a secondary thing. But I think it's important to be able to understand that there is a part of me which isn't physical. And if I begin to reflect on this idea of thoughts and feelings, I realize that you can't measure these. How do you measure your feelings? I can say, I love a rose, but I can also say, I love you. Now, is there a difference? We use the word love so randomly now. It's almost as if it's lost its value. But there is an experience which is beyond measure and isn't of the physical dimension. Think about even a rose, and I can tell you the length of its stem. I can tell you the diameter of the flower. I could even count the petals and tell you how many petals it has. But that would give you no idea of its beauty. In the same way, here I am. Yes, this is my height. This is my weight. This is the color of my hair. All of that can be known. But who am I as a human being? You'll only be able to know that as I express my thoughts into words, express my feelings into actions, and then that which is invisible but is very real begins to manifest in an external way. So when people begin to think about what is it that's actually real and may not be visible, but yes, it has a reality of existence, then you think about thoughts and feelings and impressions and memories and personality, a whole heap of things. And you realize that this is who the human being actually is. And yes, there is this which is important and precious, but what's making all of this happen is this being of light. And once you accept that, then you can start experimenting with this idea. An example of one individual who came to us and said, I want to learn to meditate, but I don't believe in God. Can you teach me? I said, yes, we can. And we talked about soul. And he experimented with this idea of this light that I am, that's shining. And he came back the following week. He didn't take the normal course of every day, but came back the next week. And he said, I've experimented with this and I've had a fantastic experience. I met with my ex-wife and we had matters to discuss. And for the first time after years, I didn't get angry with her because I was seeing her as that shining light in the forehead. And I was feeling myself the same. And so she was saying things that were total nonsense, but I didn't get angry. So it was lovely to know that he had experimented and found value in the experiment and was then understanding that this is something he needed to practice more. So people have to at least begin somewhere. And I think that starting with thoughts and feelings and coming to recognize the values of the inner being is a door that opens up soul consciousness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat, Sister Jayanti. It's from Rosemary, and she asks, "What are some of the benefits you mentioned? Of meditating. What are the benefits of meditating?"
In addition, not to getting angry.
Yes,
That's a very important one. Getting to know myself. I think that a lot of problems that come in today's world are from the insecurity of not knowing who I really am. And so we mask that insecurity sometimes with bossiness, sometimes with control, all sorts of things. But sometimes, of course, inferiority complexes surface. So meditation allows me to know the goodness that I carry within myself. And then as I continue, I'm also able to see that aspect which isn't so good and I need to work on and I need to change and transform. So knowing myself is a big, big thing. Secondly, meditation helps me relate more comfortably to other people because I'm not wanting anything from them. My meditation is filling me and fulfilling me to the extent that I'm content. And so when I engage with another, it's not because I want them to love me, I want them to be attracted to me, I want them to praise me. I don't need that, but I'm able to start giving something. And so the quality of interaction changes considerably. Meditation also means that my inner capacity of tolerance, endurance, patience, the list is long, but I'm able to develop all these inner powers. And let me close with one very important thing that's absolutely vital in today's world. There's so much camouflage and so much falsehood around. It's the post-truth era anyway, that it's very difficult to discern right and wrong and good and bad, or even ugly and mediocre and beautiful. It's a confusion. Meditation clears through all the clouds and the smoke, and you're able to see things more clearly than you would have otherwise. So that capacity to discern is sharpened. And then, of course, once I'm able to discern and see things more clearly, I'm also able to have decision-making power, which is probably more accurate. And where in today's world, where people used to have 5-year plans, which company has a 5-year plan anymore? I don't think they can. Planning 6 months ahead is quite a struggle. And especially in the last 2 years, you couldn't plan 3 weeks ahead, not even that. And so then that discernment capacity, removing all the clouds and the smoke on the way, and just being able to see things clearly and knowing what it is that is important, then my decision kicks in. And I'll probably be more comfortable with that decision than I would have been without the meditation. So these are just a few of the things that one benefits from. So meditation is not just thinking about liberation and somewhere up there in the clouds, but meditation is a real tool to manage to not just survive in difficult times, but to actually thrive, no matter what the conditions outside may be.
Thanks so much for that, Sister Jayanti. There's another question, and someone asks, what advice do you have for cultivating wholesome communities, Sister Jayanti?
I think a shared vision is important, because that shared vision brings people together in the first place. So it's not just a personality, well, I like this person, I don't like this person, so yes, I can manage to be with them. No. What is the vision that we have for the self, for others, and the world? And if we have a shared vision, then that attracts like-minded people to come together. And then inevitably there'll be ups and downs and challenges with personalities and whatever it is. But the shared vision pulls you out of that tangle and again makes you realize that that is where we're headed and we're all on the same path, the same journey together. So shared vision is the first step. And then secondly, sharing time together in meditation, in silence, not just on your own here and there when you want, when you can, but the spiritual practice and discipline holds a community together very powerfully. So the shared silence, the meditation, the shared spiritual study, and the discussion of that study, so that I'm seeing how you interpreted something, and it's a beautiful interpretation that hadn't come to me, and I share something that you might benefit from. And so that discussion creates a deeper recognition of who each one is, and you value them. And then, of course, yes, definitely recognizing that each one has a very specific role that they are playing because of their specialities. Now, remove this one from the community, and there'd be a big gap, a big hole. And so they are valuable. It appears to be a little role, but yet, it's like the story of the king who lost the battle because his horse had lost a shoe. As children, we used to hear that story, and all that was wanted was a little nail in the horseshoe. But the little nail went missing, the horseshoe was lost, the horse stumbled, and the king lost the battle. So a community recognizes the value of each and every individual, visible, not visible, that's irrelevant, but each one has such a significant role to play. So these are some of the things that I'm very aware of through the years.
That's so beautiful, Sister Jayanti. Thank you so much. I have a question myself, if no one else wants to ask something. So the first Lighthouse Dialogue, Sister Jayanti, was with Jatsuma Tenzin Palmo, and she talked about psychic pollution, which was something that really struck me back then. So she said that, in terms of climate emergency, climate change, we're looking a lot at pollution and all the material pollution that we're creating as human beings, but we often forget about our psychic pollution. And with that, she meant negative emotions, anger, hate, anxiety, all these negative emotions that were, especially in this more troublesome period on Earth, are seeing around us. So my question is, how do you see the community that you just spoke of, the influence of a community, a spiritual community, in managing our emotional hygiene, as we could call it?
I see that the morning practice is the fundamental method. So we have a time very early in the morning. I won't tell you exactly when. It will scare you. And then we have the 6 o'clock session that's also considered early, but it's reasonable. Some people go to work at 6 o'clock. These sessions of silence is a daily cleansing. And we do it individually, and then we're also doing it in community. And then the daily lesson that we studied together is amazing, because that really is something that somehow the lesson touches upon whatever is the issue that's been coming up and clears it. It works in a very amazing way.
Thank you so much, Sister Jayanti. I think this is probably a good moment to bring this meeting to a close. We are so very grateful for this conversation. To you, to Vicki, to all the sisters and brothers from the Brahma Kumaris organization all around the world. And also we'd like to thank all the family of Jamyang London Buddhist Center and Science and Wisdom Live.